In the late 1800s, there was an architect named Louis Sullivan, and he is the one that the phrase form follows function is accredited to. So this is a quote from him. It says, "Whether it be the sweeping eagle in his flight, or the open apple blossom, the toiling workhorse, the blithe swan, the branching oak, the winding stream at its base, the drifting clouds, over all the coursing sun, form ever follows function. And this is the law. Where function does not change, form does not change. It is the pervading law of all things organic and inorganic, of all things physical and metaphysical, and all things human and all things superhuman, of all true manifestations of the head, the heart, of the soul, that the life is recognizable in its expression, that form ever follows function. This is the law." Now, Louis Sullivan was an architect, and his assistant, who you might be more familiar with, was Frank Lloyd Wright. And he preached this same maxim, maybe to a slightly different degree, but it's really just the idea that form follows function. Function is more important. The same way that my shirt is on my body has arms that moves around, and my shirt is created to suit what my body's function would be. And so there might be things that you can wear to keep you warm, or things as a purely artistic statement. If you're wearing a big poncho, even if it's not raining, that might just be, but there's still places for your arms, and there's still going to be a certain piece of inherent quality where the form is going to follow the function of the piece. And this is something that I struggle with as a graphic design major, and I was really into producing art. I was making portraits and charcoal, paintings and sculptures, and I was expressing myself. I was just expressing myself in an artistic way. But as I got into design, I had to almost reprogram my brain that form needed to follow function, that if a website or an app isn't that usable, it doesn't matter how good the typography looks. It doesn't matter what the colors are. It matters how the app functions. And on top of that functionality, you can start adding design and layout and color. And sometimes the way you design something will inform the functionality. But your desire to express yourself should never be higher than the functionality of the app. If your functionality is equal to or greater than the artistic expression, then you're going to be in a good place. So with all that being said, I'm going to review some product designs from Dribbble and kind of just start to look at form versus function in some of these apps. Okay, first of all, we've got this digital loan interface. So at first glance, it's not a bad design, but something about it kind of leaves something lacking. And I know that we're talking about form versus function, but from a purely visual standpoint, there's just something feels a little bit off when I look at this compared to looking at this. This one just feels like I could understand it more. Maybe I could use it more easily. Whereas, and this is another example from that same app, it's just incredibly simple. And the typeface, the color scheme, it seems like it's well thought out. Whereas this one, look at the apply button. We've got apply, 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 apply. And the use of color is we're using purple in the background, and then purple on the buttons, and then purple on these icons, assuming that these aren't even interactable. And then we've got like a ticket shape with a dotted line, which if this is a loan detail, why would it be tickets? And then there's just lots going on here. And it's hard to understand how this would function because there's lots and lots of text on here. It just seems a little bit unorganized. Even though it does appear to be organized, it has like a cluttered, disorganized feel compared to something like this where it's just very simple and straightforward. And we'll forgive them for this typo right here, but I will say that does kind of drive me crazy that S is in there. But it just has a better feel. Like I can tell that purple is the absolute primary call to action. Even right here, they're using purple and then this white on top of purple to accentuate that call to action a little bit more. But they're definitely using purple as their main call to action. Whereas on this one, then we've got purple in the background, we've got purple buttons, we've got a purple background here. There's just a lot going on. And I think that you could probably take another stab at this, play around with the type sizes a little bit. So look how tiny loan detail is compared to easy loan. And the type sizes are kind of all over the place, loan amount and first payment. I don't know if those are the same or not, but then you got these really big kind of crammed in, just not a lot of negative space in here and a kind of an inconsistent usage of color and button size when compared to something like this. And I think you could very, very likely get this loan. I know that loans aren't as fun and trendy as scooters, but I bet you could get this loan interface looking as good as this scooter interface if you borrowed some of the principles they're using. They're layering the information a lot more, where you have maybe just a title and a line of text. And only on this huge full page do you get 2 lines of title text, 2 lines of body copy. So you could probably clean up this a lot more and make a decision. Do you want to apply your first payment amount? Is that the main call to action? Or is a $20 million loan the main call to action? Or pay later, all shop? Whatever that means. Is that a main call to action? So sometimes you need to just really clarify what is the function of the app before you can start making those style decisions. All right, moving on to this next one. This has, I intentionally picked a lot of these product designs that have these kind of rounded tiles because a lot of these apps are using these big rounded tiles and these splashes of color. So I'm trying to show a difference between this one and this one and this one. They're all kind of related, kind of a similar style. But one of the things that really makes the difference between these three, we've got kind of a standard looking typeface. And on this one, we're using typeface, which you don't see quite as often, but it looks like we're looking for coffee and dessert, cafe, kind of this cafe green autumn feel. So we've got these big rounded tiles, big rounded corners on these images, but we're using autumn colors, orange, this kind of creamy red, and this green with this serif font. It produces a much different look and feel than these bright colors and the standard typeface. So maybe this is good for a credit profile because it's maybe a little bit more standard. But then looking back at the Juice app, this Juice Up typeface is kind of, a italic, maybe that's the logo type, but you can tell that the most popular avocado, mango, all of these typefaces, all of the type is using a font that's not your standard go-to kind of font, and it gives it a little bit different of a flavor. This one in particular, in my opinion, it has the most personality because of the color scheme and the typeface and the simplicity of the function. I can very, very easily see, okay, add 1 apple juice, add 1 pineapple juice, add 1 grapes juice. Should be grape, but anyway. And then I've got the ability to pay right here. And I think the product imagery is really what makes this stand out, along with the color scheme and the typeface usage. So even though the imagery here is okay, but you can tell it's a lot more of kind of user-generated content, and sometimes you can't get around that. But just overall, this is a very, very meticulously planned out studio shot, and you're going to have better photographs when you are creating stuff like this than you are when you're going to use user-generated content. And again, there's no way you would get some studio shots in here for every single restaurant, especially if you're using some kind of map and user-generated content. You're just not going to get that. but it is a trade-off for what you're designing. So I think they've done a great job with this one, but I just want to point out that it's got a different style based on the way that this app is functioning. It's going to have a different style because of these different images, whereas this one is highly curated, and the typeface just kind of adds to that. But if you go back to this one, you can see there is no specific imagery. They're just using these icons. And actually, these are kind of hard to see. They don't have a lot of, it's kind of actually hard to see the difference between these icons. I see it more as just a block of color. The icons they're using down here in the tab bar seem a little more interesting. So I would be curious to see maybe some solid versions of these icons. Because they're using this kind of standard looking icon set and the standard typeface, it has a pretty decent feel, but it's not quite as stylistic, and it doesn't quite convey a specific style the same way that the serif and these colors do on this one. And then especially for this kind of juice, you know, they're using the colors of these fruit for the juice. Whereas, I mean, credit profile, like what colors are you even going to use? But it definitely feels a little bit all over the place. We've got this kind of neon blue, neon green, and then these muted oranges and reds. And then you've got almost completely different colors over here. And then your green over there. So it just doesn't have quite as much like solid thought out style, because there are a little bit more, it almost seems like it was unplanned a little bit more. And so a lot of times if you just stick with some simple decisions like this serif typeface, this primary call to action, and these accent colors, just sticking with the basics and getting a simple color scheme, simple typeface, and especially if you're using some really nice product imagery, that's just going to help your design have that style that you're going for. It'll be a lot easier if you can lock into those things and make some strong decisions about that. So looking at a couple more here, I think this is another good example of using a good color scheme, and kind of a similar thing here where they're using these kind of interesting illustrations and background colors. But you can tell that the typography, they've got that one big type size, their second smaller type size, and then you've got this third type size, and then maybe this fourth size right here. But it just has a consistent look and feel, but it has a very specific type of feel because they're using this typeface with these illustrations and these colors. So it kind of has a similar vibe to this one, but they're being even a little bit more consistent with their pages here. And again, I don't know the function of this app, but I just want to point out the usage of typography and color, and they're not sacrificing any of the fundamentals. It appears to be a very functional app and very straightforward. You can tell that you can probably tap any of these. You can tell that activities is active right here. And then if you tap down here, it's shop. It just seems to have a good functioning type of interface that is accentuated by the form that they've chosen. Here's another example. This app and this app and this app, basically all the same with iPhone design with their rounded corner rectangles, but they all have a very distinct look and feel. And really it's typeface choice, color choice, and this kind of the imagery that they're using. So on this one, same kind of thing. They're just very strategically using this lime green and variations of the lime green with this kind of nice, that's not black, that's like a deep, rich navy color that complements that green really, really well. And so simple color scheme. They're probably using one typeface for this. All of this stuff right in here is one typeface. This is probably the exact same size right here. And then maybe they've got a slightly larger typeface, but they're using type size, negative space, and color and layout just in a very controlled fashion. Lots of negative space in here, fun little illustrations that aren't really taking away from the design. They're using restraint And all of that creates this fun, it just creates a fun feel, and it's got a very specific style because of those very calculated, they're nailing the typography sizes, nailing the layout with the negative space, nailing the color with the various usages of green, and there's not plenty of nice contrast. They might could use a bold right in here to make it look similar to this down below, but I also like the way that this is starting to look as a headline, and maybe these are more like a headline. I think the thin stroke around here is the one thing that doesn't quite feel like it fits with the entire. They're using big, flat, blocky colors. Look how nice this card looks against these flat green, flat white. But then they have these strokes right here. I almost wonder if they turn these into like green backgrounds and used white type. That might make it a little bit stronger. But overall, they're nailing those typography, layout, color, and they're using the really interesting imagery in a tasteful kind of way. And so it's creating a really strong, rich concept right here. All right, I brought this one up. This one has almost like a Slack vibe. It's kind of using the Slack purple that I've seen, and Slack even uses this green call to action. So even this looks kind of like the standard color for Slack sidebar. So be careful if you're using colors from another app, because it will immediately feel like that app. I think this is a nice layout. The typo in planning right here absolutely kills me. Make sure you don't have any typos in your work that you post to Dribbble. And if you do, delete it and repost another one. Like, just get all the typos out of your system. It's going to happen. I make typos all the time, but please correct them. It's just kind of like it's a mark of lack of attention to detail. Even though this is nice, it has a decent layout and decent usage of type size, something kind of falls flat. And I think it's because it almost feels maybe a little too generic. And I also don't know what I'm even doing here. Like, I'm adding family members, but I'm checking off family movie. Like, there's not a lot of functionality that I can really understand here. And I think it's just there's also a lot of content on this page. And for whatever reason, it just feels it feels like it's lacking something. And maybe it is the change of type size. You do look at the difference between this one size, looks like a slightly larger size, and then a slightly smaller size, and then another size in between. And then also, this is really, really light gray, hard to read. I cannot read that. Can barely read that, and can barely read that. And these are really, really small. They're also, look at the difference between this big corner radius and then these really, really tight corner radius. And also the negative space between here, it just feels a little odd. The corner radius on these two seem like maybe they're okay, and they're also using this big, big corner radius right here. And so the lack of type size similarity and the corner radius is kind of all over the place. And the layout isn't quite as locked in. It makes it feel like it's good, it's okay. It's not as locked in, same way that some of the other ones are. And lastly, I just want to pull this one up. I'm not 100% sure what kind of project this is. It looks like just kind of a random dashboard. But this one has a lot of, I think the typeface is nice. Color scheme is nice. The layout is nice. However, I feel like there's just too much information. It's everything all in your face all at once. I wonder, what would it look like if these subheading, this double line of text, what if that was just reserved for the detail page and there was a lot more negative space? Does it really need to say team and PM over here? Could we get rid of some of this stuff? It just seems like there's just a lot going on, and you'll notice that all of the type sizes are really similar. There's a lot of different type sizes between start project, even these numbers and these titles. There's not a lot of scale on the type size, and that's kind of hurting this. Whereas the layout and the color and the corner radius, that all looks really, really good. But the amount of content and the over labeling and I'm not sure if this kind of gradient thing feels a little bit weird. They're using a lot of flat colors. And I kind of like a lot of what's going on here, but it's missing that fundamental typography and negative space kind of fundamental rules where you're trying to use as few typefaces as possible. And if you are going to use a bigger typeface, it needs to be bigger for a reason. And if you're going to use a smaller typeface, it needs to be smaller for a reason. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of different type sizes, a lot of different little elements because you weren't staying true to those typography rules. And what could be a really great looking dashboard ends up falling a little bit short because of the type choice. And so I think revising this with a stronger focus on typography, maybe these numbers get much larger, maybe the tiles, maybe you go 3 wide and the images become bigger. I'm not sure what exactly to do here, but those are some of the things that could really help out. And a lot of times you don't know whether or not to make tiles bigger or the typography bigger. Sometimes you just don't know what to do unless you know how it's going to work. And that's where the function comes into play. So do you really need to see 8 different tiles all at once? Is that a critical piece of your dashboard? Or are you more likely to see 2 or 3 and take action on those? And if so, maybe we can make those larger and we apply the typographic form to the way that it's going to be used. So I know we're not diving too deep into actual function with all of this, but a lot of times the style and the overall look and feel is really going to piggyback on the function of the app and also the direction that you set. So you still have to nail typography, color, layout, use nice imagery, use nice icons, and then push all of that together in a very calculated way to create the kind of style that you want your project to have.